Welcome, everybody. Good evening from wherever you are. Looks like we have people from across the country. I'm Randy Salem from Business Climate Leaders here in sunny, beautiful California, just south of San Francisco. Lovely day here. Pleasure to have you all with us, and pleasure to have Klaus with us. So just to let you know administratively, well, Klaus is going to talk for about 20 minutes, and then we'll have question and answers, but feel free to post any questions or comments you have in the chat box as we go along, and we'll get started soon. So Klaus is fantastic, an incredible individual, great resource to us in BCL and CCL. I've really enjoyed discussions and contributions that he has made to BCL and in other ways. So he is a very seasoned executive, retired now, but worked in food services for Disney, running Hong Kong Disneyland food services, I know, and then worked for a wholesaler in Europe, a large wholesaler. So a breadth of expertise and wisdom that he brings to us. And of course, anybody who knows him knows how passionate he is about what CCL is doing and about changing the structure and just overall food system. So with that, welcome, Klaus. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you. And I'm going to take the screen, hold on.
Oop.
Years ago.
Klaus, you got muted there for a second. Can you just start over?
Oops. Am I on? Okay.
You're off. You're good.
All right. Good. So I was saying I joined CCL about almost 6 years ago. BCL shifted to BCL about 2 years ago as sector leader agriculture. Maybe 2 to 3 years ago, I decided to focus on NGOs, because the influence of NGOs on the congressional process is significant, and I thought it would be important to have allies in that area. And I can tell you, the amazing thing is that virtually all the NGOs that I'm linked up with are on board with a carbon tax today. So the presentation that I wanted to show you today, I got invited by the 4 per Thousand organization and Regeneration International to participate in a North American conference on soil health, and show this presentation that I'm walking you through now in a moment here. So that's is really rewarding, to have been accepted here and included with these groups. Let me just show you here. Let's get started, and I'll show you here what Randy and Sarah have done. This wonderful website for business climate leaders on their resources. So you can take a look through the introduction here, but here's the sector industry resources. So business climate leaders has as its core mission to explain to specific industry sectors how a carbon tax would impact them and why it is important for their business sector to have a tax on carbon in order to stimulate the innovation and the changes in their sector that we need to undertake in order to move on into a different carbon-free world. So we have, you see all these sectors here: agriculture, chemical, electricity, and so on, transportation. So what we want to talk about today is agriculture, and within agriculture, we're starting out, we have a toolkit, and if you go into this toolkit here, you will see an introduction page that gives you plenty of links to get into, and resource materials, PowerPoint presentations, and so on, that will help you to get familiar with the topic, understand what are the highlights in the agricultural sector, and how can you talk to different members within the food and agricultural sector. The presentation I'm going to walk you through in a moment. We have the Agricultural Climate Declaration here. That's Randy's wonderful work here. So here's where we want to have members sign up. We already have a number of signatories from farms, but we really would like to broaden that, obviously. Then you have Ellie Sparks has done some wonderful work on engaging your farm bureau, talking to very conservative members of the industry. Here's a webinar that I was co-hosting with the Secretary General of the 4 per Thousand initiative. That initiative was started by the French government in partnership with the German government as part of the Paris Accord that came out of the Paris Accord. And so they are solely focused on using agriculture and soil for carbon sequestration and restoration of the natural system. So anyway, I would encourage you to take a look through here and get into some more of these very specific topics. So here's the PowerPoint itself that we would like to show you. I think I'm going to open it up with Google Slides to make that a little bit more visible and put it into presentation if it allows me. Okay, it does. All right, so that again, I got 50. We have 15 minutes allotments, to build our case in this conference. There are groups. I'm partnered with I think 3 or 4 other NGOs focused on agriculture. And we each have a 15-minute presentation, and then there's a discussion group, and then not the winner is the wrong word, but then whichever presentation rises to the surface is then being presented to the entire conference the next day. So we are coming, we're starting with this overview of who are we, Citizen Climate Lobby. I really like this new slide here. Thank you, Nancy and Jason, who were having with this. The Agricultural Action Team actually partnered with me on developing this here. I think that's a really powerful introduction slide here. And then we're going, what business climate leaders influence influencers. While Citizen Climate Lobby is lobbying members of Congress, in BCL, we lobby members of the business community, who in turn are the influencers to the political process. And I think it's fair to say that members of Congress will not be able to move if they are facing a significant headwind from the business community. So we are looking for partners within the business community to come on board and share our voice. So to bring that home to the business community, what is of importance to you is your consumer. Right? Businesses care about consumers, and consumers care about environmental degradation, public health and animal welfare, the need for carbon sequestration. So we are then explaining further the environmental degradation in agriculture has caused, for example, the loss of topsoil. Plowing, synthetic fertilizer, which is made with natural gas, pesticides made with oil, have caused a global degradation and loss of topsoil. These are astonishing facts. When you go into this sector here, we have literally lost 1/3 of our topsoil in the last 40 years, and it's just not a topic that we are aware of. But synthetic fertilizer disrupts the organic process inside the soil. It disrupts the photosynthesis that is naturally occurring through plants, enriching the carbon content of soil. and the soil basically becomes sand. Once the organic matter inside the soil has died off, then there is no more life inside that soil. The synthetic fertilizer runoff causes algae blooms and dead zones in lakes, rivers, and the oceans. You can watch from satellite pictures how, for example, the Mississippi River Delta runoff is causing mile-wide dead zones inside the Gulf of Mexico. There's nothing alive in there. Alongside the coast of Florida, for example, every once in a while, you get a report about millions of fish dying off and flooding the coastlines. That's directly caused by synthetic fertilizer runoff. You look at Lake Erie, where you have these enormous algae blooms caused by synthetic fertilizer runoff. Aquifers are pumped beyond their natural replenishment rate worldwide, really. It's an enormous problem because you can foresee how many more years we have based on current practices, because once these aquifers are empty, they're done. It took us thousands of years for these things to fill. And we're growing biofuel with irrigated corn. So it's just a lot of very illogical things in the way that we conduct our agriculture at this point. So environmental degradation is a big thing. It's also leading to species die-off, right? So when the soil dies, that means that there's nothing organic living in the soil. That means there's no worms and no feedstock for insects, for example, and worms, which are food for birds and small mammals, so it goes up the food chain. So you have a massive die-off of species around the world, really, wherever they use this, as a direct cause of our agricultural practices. So then is public health and animal welfare. So the loss of organic matter in the soil has degraded the nutritional value of food. There is measurable decrease in the nutrients that are inside our food. The manure from current livestock practices is creating air pollution, food contamination, water contamination, this entire practice, and we see it now during this virus crisis here, how problematic these CAFOs really are. These concentrations of our food system is actually, and I've been saying this for some time, it's a national security issue. Because imagine a virus like swine flu or anything hitting, or bird flu hitting our livestock in these concentrations. There's no redundancy. It takes out enormous shares of our capacity. And then because the way livestock is being crowded together in such enormous concentrations, the animals get sick. So they're using antibiotics, growth hormones, and I can't even pronounce this until used for disease control and growth promotion prophylactically. And so that those drugs transfer into the human food chain and are causing major issues in our health system. Then this is the topic that really attracted me into agriculture. Today, the way we handle agriculture, it contributes about 24% of total CO2e emissions. And that's a low number. That's the number that is generally agreed on by the IPCC and science. But at the same time, soil is a carbon sink. There are 2 to 3 times as much carbon in the soil as there is in the atmosphere. But we are releasing it. The way that the industrial farming system works, by the time by the time the soil organic matter dies off, it releases the carbon. So we are carbon positive, where we should be carbon negative in our agriculture. So there's so the process of photosynthesis working to sequester carbon out of the atmosphere is a more complex topic. And the video that I showed you earlier, where I am partnered with the Secretary General of the 4 per 1,000 organization, goes into great detail on how it works. So if you're interested in getting into the technical aspect of it, please take a look at this video where the Secretary General explains how agriculture can be reformatted, basically like we conducted agriculture for 10,000 years, to become carbon negative. There is no viable alternative at the scale of land use to sequester carbon of the atmosphere. When we have seen a number of ideas about carbon sequestration that are technical, there's no way that you can get gigatons of carbon out with any level of cost effectiveness and timeliness as you could with agriculture. I mean, we can literally turn agriculture in one season. And agriculture can go from 24% carbon positive to carbon negative. There's nothing out there that would have the capacity to do that other than this here. So there is regenerative organic agriculture. And this, I mean, I don't have enough time now to get into any level of detail here, but I would refer you back to this video, that I was just describing, where it really explains this in great detail. So going into agricultural practices, shifting them towards regenerative organic solves a range of problems the industry is now struggling with. It builds organic matter in soil. It restores the nutritional value of food. It restores life and habitats, because when you bring soil organic matter back to life, then it spins off. And I mean, you have heard about bees, pollinator die off and all these things. All of that can be reversed by moving into a regenerative organic process. It retains water, retains soil runoff. An organic rich soil is like a sponge. When it rains, it just soaks itself full of water and it stays in place. Whereas a depleted soil just washes off. I mean, the reason we have lost 1/3 of our topsoil in the last 40 years is because the soil just washes out. It washes into the streams, it washes out into the oceans. Ultimately, it's gone. So it is important for just so many reasons here. So adding soil organic matter has the capacity to neutralize most of humanity's carbon emissions. And this is what the 4 per 1,000 initiative is arguing. It's the reason why we need to restore soil back to health. It buys us the time to shift the energy systems out of fossil fuels. We need to buy time. It's clear that there's no way we could magically go carbon neutral within any foreseeable period of time. So it is obvious that we need to find some other solution, and agriculture offers that by neutralizing this output, putting carbon into the soil, and buying us time. So then this is the argument that I was making to the NGOs, basically. So if you are in favor of organic anything, you should sign our bill. Because the industrial form of agriculture creates externalities that are costly to society, but they're not recognized and they're not accounted for at the source. Fossil fuel-based inputs for synthetic fertilizer and pesticides, long-range logistics, transport would increase in cost, creating market-based incentives towards regenerative organic practices. Now, if you're an organic farmer today, you are running a higher cost, because you don't discharge anything into nature. The water that you return is clean. You don't pollute anything. But your practices are more labor intensive, more input intensive, and they're not subsidized. Whereas corn and the commodity crops are subsidized in the farm bill, the organic farmer is not. So if you're an organic anything, whether that's a farmer or a food processor or a restaurant that wants to serve organic food, you should sign our bill, because that will level the playing field here to make you, to put you into a more competitive position. Realizing, that the change in increasing the cost of carbon inputs will take time. I mean, I'm sorry, to change over into regenerative organic practices will take time. It typically takes 3 to 5 years to convert. We realize that farmers need added incentives. We need to help farmers financially. There are all kinds of things that government could do, but a market-based approach would be to help to pay farmers to sequester carbon on a per ton basis into the ground. And there are several initiatives. California is already big at it, but there are across a number of states initiatives that are popping up that pay farmers, for example, to put cover crops on, to move into a low-till or no-till process, to rotate their crops. And then there are two organizations here, NORI and Terraton, and I would encourage you to look them up, who have created, NORI here particularly, has created an open marketplace where you can buy carbon credits. So the old form of cap and trade, for example, was very problematic because it was just extremely specific and very difficult to enforce and to control. Here, NORI has developed measurement processes that sort of approximate how much a farmer has sequestered carbon, how much carbon the farmer has sequestered and put into the ground, and then they get $15, $20 per ton through this market exchange here. Terraton is a company. Now they have committed to sequester a teraton, 1,000 billion tons of carbon into the soil, and they're working with farmers to achieve that. So we are supporting this. So as we go into these conversations, we say, look, we realize that a tax on fossil fuels will disrupt your cost structure short term. And so as an organization, we are supporting and any help, whether that's governmental or private market focused here, to assist you in that conversion. And then we're going into our typical spiel of who is all supporting our bill, and then go into what can you do, and then we go into Q&A. So this is like, I'm sorry, I mean, it's a very fast overview, and there's a lot of detail missing in this short discussion here. But I hope to have now explained in big picture format here why the agricultural sector is, first of all, so important. You can see it now when the virus is disrupting our economy, how food security is immediately ratcheting up to the very top of the conversation. Right? I mean, I'm engaging in the local market here with church groups and NGOs to how can we get food to people? How can we protect our small business food sector, our restaurants, our small farmers, our farmers markets and so on, because they are running flat out of money. Okay, the market is demonetized at the local level. And consumers have run out of money to even buy food. So how do we protect this? So I feel very passionate about engaging here with our agricultural sector in using this time of change, to support innovations to move us into the next phase, not to restart the same old mess that we had before, but to move forward and move into a regenerative organic future. So that was pretty much what I had, and Randy, we are open to a discussion and questions.
Thanks, Klaus. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, that was fantastic. Thank you. So a couple of things. One, can you just explain 4 parts per thousand?
Okay, so the 4 parts per thousand, and actually when you look it up, it's 4p1000.org is their website. I mean, I'm gonna maybe I'm gonna send you a link in a moment here. The idea is that if we can put in 0.4% of organic matter into the soil per year, then we can basically neutralize the carbon output of humanity. So that's the logic and how they came up with this name.
Thank you. I'm just putting the link to the detailed presentation of the 4 per thousand that you mentioned in chat, because a few people had a question about that. Okay. Let's see. Question. Congress is looking at the Trillion Trees Act. Is this a good thing? Does it matter what kind of trees are planted? Are lumber plantations a good kind of tree to plant? The act favors them.
Yeah, I mean, of course it's good to plant trees, right? But you have to plant the right trees in the right place. And not every tree is suited for every particular environment. Agriculture in general, agroforestry, agroecology has to be location specific. You know, each region has unique soil conditions, unique climate, water accessibility, and socioeconomic conditions. So what you do in Oregon is not the same than what you do in Kansas or in Florida. You know, you have to be location specific with your solutions. And to say that we're going to plant 1 million trees or whatever number is actually more problematic because it's absent of a plan. Right? You have to integrate the planting of trees with agriculture and with general land management for that to make sense.
Thanks, Klaus. Am I correct? HR 763, as it now stands, does not give farmers any direct incentive for carbon sequestration. How do you think we can progress on that politically? Okay,
so there are, first of all, there are right now, how many? 6 carbon bills out there, right?
7.
7. So we are one of 7 bills. And in fact, when I was participating in a webinar just a couple of days ago, which was hosted by NGOs focused on agriculture, but also invited the business community. There were over 400 people who participated, and they put a screen on listing those 7 carbon bills, and ours was one of these 7 carbon bills listed. So they're in favor of a carbon tax, but they haven't made up their mind which one to support, right? And there are bills, and we have had internal discussions saying we should income qualify the dividend, right? So I mean, this is one of the conversations we can't really have right now because the bill is not in discussion. Once the bill is on the floor and it's being debated, then those questions will come up. My personal preference, and I think I can speak for the Agricultural Action Team in this sense, is that we are in favor of income qualifying the dividend and taking a component, cutting it off at as 150,000 or whatever, and taking the saving and investing it. And we do feel from the agricultural team, agriculture is the most logical place to invest from a standpoint of food security and carbon sequestration.
Thanks, Klaus. Paul from Minnesota, his question, he said, where are the programs you speak of? Where have they been successful? Paul, does that make sense to you, Klaus?
You're talking about regenerative agriculture, I assume?
Yeah, he's nodding.
Okay, so this is probably more than I can respond to in a moment, but I'm going to send you a link here. Of this is the organization. There's sort of an umbrella organization, Regeneration International, which is the North American representative of the 4 per 1,000 organization, because that's a European thing. Regenerative agriculture is 10,000 years old. You know, there is nothing new or invented here. We have done agriculture. It's biblical. You know, in the Bible, there are references to agriculture, how to treat the soil, how to treat the land. You know, it has to be idled every 7th year. You have to rotate your crop, because each crop takes different nutrients out of the soil. So you can't put the same crop in over and over, because you're depleting the soil. You use cover crops, because cover crops sequester nitrogen into the soil in a natural way. So as you're rotating your crops, you're selecting specific crops. Big topic. When you look at cultures that have lived on their same soil for thousands of years, I mean, think about the Middle East, think about Lebanon or Egypt or Italy or Spain, you know, cultures that have not destroyed their soil, you know, that have lived sustainably on their same land for generations and generations. Their diet is linked with a farming cycle that makes sense to the land, right? So we are basically going back to the future kind of thing. What we have done since World War II with the invention of synthetic nitrogen fertilizer. You know, we have, I mean, synthetic nitrogen fertilizer into the soil is cocaine for you, right? It's a rush. It brings out, it just makes everything go wild, you know, and productivity increases and so on. But in the process, it burns it out. It burns out the soil. So that was, for a few years, that was a fantastic thing to have. And in the last 10, 20 years, we are realizing that we're really destroying our natural habitat in the process of doing this. So we're basically having to correct something that just went really badly wrong in the last 10, 20, 30 years. I mean, since World War II, really.
Thanks, Klaus. So we've crossed the half-hour mark. So I just wanted to thank Klaus and thank everybody for coming. We'll keep going. I think Klaus is open to answer more questions, but just want to let you know that to honor that for everybody, and wish you a good night if you do need to leave. So Klaus, question I have, which is, this is all focuses on really good farming practices, organic, regenerative, etc. So if you're a industrial farmer or food company, then does the bill make sense to you? How do we position the bill to those companies that aren't necessarily desirous of switching?
So we had a lot of angst when we got into this topic, and we had conversations with the board about 3 years ago, when we started saying, you know, the farming community really has to be brought on board here, because they are so deeply impacted by fossil fuels. Unless they're included in this is a solution for you, you know, this bill will not have a chance of passing. And Marshall Saunders actually got involved, and I was in a conversation with him about, you know, we need to get farmers on board. So our first reaction then was, we can't talk to farmers about climate change, because, you know, they just don't want to talk about climate change. And we experienced all the angst, you know, that industrial farmers have about their business, which is so reliant on chemicals. It's based on chemicals. But my take now is, we have to move on, right? So we have to support the sector of the industry that is innovative, that wants to move, that, you know, that there are great ideas out there, and by trying to keep like a dying system alive longer, and supporting it longer, we're creating more problems, and we are suppressing the innovation that wants to come forth. And there's so much great stuff happening in the food sector, but they can't get onto the retail shelves. They can't get funding. They can't go to scale because the market is locked up. So what we're saying to farmers is, look, I mean, this is science. This is not something emotional or. I mean, this is just when we're talking about we're radically in the middle. Well, the middle is where the science is. It's not about political anything. The science is telling us we have to stop using these chemicals, which are fossil fuel based chemicals, in agriculture because we're destroying ourselves here. And so, but we want to do everything we can to help you make this transition and keep you whole in the process. I think that's where I'm at. I don't know how else to frame it or to help here.
Thanks, Klaus. So first of all, clarification. Nancy Jacobson, who heads the ag team, just said in terms of the carbon sequestration, the ag team, CCL's ag team, what they're focusing on is a separate bill. So not within HR 763, but a separate bill on carbon sequestration. And it sounds like Pingree, is that a senator or Representative Pingree bill? It sounds like there's a possibility that they're looking at as a possible secondary ask to HR 763. So question, I think on the same vein in terms of industrial companies and getting them to move along. What is the transition from industrial agriculture to regenerative agriculture, and what companies, I know big ones, are doing that now?
Well, you have General Mills, for example, has committed itself. The Terraton initiative has a number of big companies on board. There is a lot of movement in the food industry. For example, the lab corn meats, right, or plant-based protein derivatives, missed the point of helping the farmer to shift their production. So what I'm saying here is big companies, multinational companies, who are really driving the demand, have to come to the conclusion that they need to prioritize the needs of the farmer instead of their business models. They may have to adapt their business models to the need of the farmer who needs to use cover crops, for example. Cover crops are like lentils, garbanzo beans and things like that. So they are cash crops, but we don't use them that much in our diet. So we will have to make massive adjustments as a people. It's not just telling the farmer to do something different. It's an integrated system. It's an integrated system that starts with the farmer, but it involves the consumer and it involves the entire supply chain. So we have to come collectively to an understanding that the farmer has the priority, and the farmer needs to tell us what they can grow in order to restore their land back to health and to secure the future of their farm. And that may be different in specific regions, right? Because there are regional differences in soil, climate, water, and socioeconomics that will determine what seed you're using, what kind of crop you're growing, what volumes of kinds of crops you're growing. And our food system at this point is not prepared to deal with that. So the supply chain will have to adjust itself to support that process.
Thanks, Klaus. It looks like, Nancy, if you're there, people are asking what the Pingree bill is. Somebody mentioned it being HR 5861. You can see that in chat. Just confirm that is the bill. Thank you. Two more questions, unless anybody has more. Somebody asked Dean Spader the relationship between our bill with the drawdown solution, and is it prerequisite? I think is talking about this agricultural movement to the success of the other 80 solutions?
Yeah, that's a great question. Our bill is an umbrella. Drawdown goes into specificity on what you need to do in different sectors of the economy. So similar to what our business climate leaders are doing, right? We have sectors that we're focused on, and we are explaining in each sector how a carbon bill will impact you. Our mission is basically to increase the cost of a product we want to use less of, to find alternatives for using oil and gas and coal. And the drawdown is talking about specific initiatives, specific actions by industry sector and by sector of the economy on what you can do there. And there's, by the way, I mean, Drawdown has now evolved their program to focus specifically on food and agriculture. And amongst the top 20, I think there are like 10 or so steps that are related to food and agriculture.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've talked to Paul Hawken in the past too, and just asked him, why isn't carbon pricing in here? He's like, no, that's a policy versus, actual actions. But it's the most important policy, he would say, in terms of incentivizing the development of all those other 80 sectors.
Right. Yeah.
So in terms of question from Susie in Minnesota, her conservative rep, thinks biofuels is the answer. So in terms of how does she move that, in terms of getting farmers, to endorse the bill, but to get her congressperson to move?
So biofuels are very problematic, right? I'm flabbergasted that we would use corn to produce biofuel. Corn is actually carbon. We're using more energy to make fuel out of corn than it produces. Right? There's more energy going in than coming out of corn biofuel. But they are, and then on top of it, we're using irrigation water, which to me is insane. Looking at our food security long range, looking 10, 20 years into the future, this is just unbelievable. But the University of San Diego has some really interesting programs. And if you go online and look up the University of San Diego energy programs, they're using, for example, algae grown in seawater to make biofuels. So they are, the number one criteria would be that we're not competing with a food crop, and we're not competing for land that should be growing food when we are talking about biofuel. So with that caveat, biofuel is a great option, but it has to be done right. And we have to have a conversation about what to do and not to do when it comes to biofuels.
Somebody mentioned using food waste for biogas.
Yeah, methane gas. You look at all the CAFOs, for example, who are now distributing freely, the sewage of a city. When you think about a CAFO with 30, 40, or 60,000 pigs in it, each pig produces roughly 3 to 5 times the sewage of a person. So you basically have a city, that's disposing its sewage into the open nature, causing all this contamination. That should be captured in a sewage system, which then can create biofuels. So there are plenty of options for those things, so definitely, it's actually one of the oldest forms of generating natural gas. Generating energy for households is methane gas. It's done in Asia all over the place. So yeah, it's one of many solutions that will help us to become carbon neutral in our energy production.
Yeah, and I think in terms of Susie in Minnesota, in terms of getting through to a representative that's into the biofuels, I guess the best thing you can do is get other farmers in the area that are supportive of the bill and supportive of change. There's a couple people in chat put mention of a movie to take a look at in terms of biofuels. Steffi says that the situation in North Carolina, I guess even the biofuel companies aren't so excited about biofuels, but you can talk to Steffi about that to hear more. Let's see, I think one last question here. I guess it's more, it sounds like industrial farming is to agriculture as coal is to energy. How can we educate the public about the benefits of regenerative organic as we now see the benefits of renewables?
So this is actually the core element of what I've been working on, is to educate the public in ways that makes the topic emotional and personal. So in some other presentations, for example, I explained that in the US, more than 20% of women test positive for glyphosate in their breast milk. Now that people test positive for glyphosate in their urine samples across the population. People test positive for chemicals that are being used in animal husbandry that are bleeding into the food supply. Antibiotics, growth hormones, things like that. So this food system means different things to different people, and we need to link on to what connects a person emotionally to this topic, so that it comes alive to the individual. Nutrient deficiency is a big thing. There are 2 billion people globally who are obese, but hundreds of millions at the same time are nutrient deprived, hungry, because the food, the highly processed and nutrient deficient input food are basically empty calories, and they do not supply sufficient nutrition to particularly feed your brain, particularly for children as they're developing. So there are so many pathologies related to this. You want to bring the conversation to the environment and personal experience of the person you're talking with.
Thanks, Klaus. Will you put your email in the chat box for everybody? And I'm going to give you one last question, and we'll call it a night. So, interesting one to me. Will more land have to be farmed by carbon negative means to grow the same amount of food?
Hold on for a second. I just got distracted.
Sure. Shall I repeat that?
Yeah, please do.
So Klaus's email is there. Feel free to email him if you want to talk more, have more questions. From Steve here, will more land have to be farmed by carbon negative means to grow the same amount of food?
So there are farmers who have developed model farms, like Gabe in Montgomery and others, and they have actually shown higher yield per acre than you have on a commodity farm. But they are multi-crop farms, and then they have integrated livestock, and that's how farms. In fact, I was born in Germany, and my relatives on the countryside had a farm. So I would go during summer on vacation and visit, and every single farmer had a few pigs and a few cows and a chicken coop, and they would use all the manure to put it out into the field. So these integrated farms are highly efficient. Now, they're not efficient in a sense of labor productivity, for example, right? Because you have these huge machines, and you can replace hundreds and thousands of workers that way. But from what you can get out of the land in terms of yield per acre, there's no reason why regenerative farms should be less productive than the industrial farming system is today. But it requires a complete reconfiguration of the entire supply chain.
All right, with that, a big thank you to you, Klaus. Really appreciate you here and appreciate you sharing your presentation, which you're actually giving that presentation to the organization in Montreal, but virtually now, next month, I believe.
Right, May 11th, yeah.
Good. So thank you, everybody, for joining us, and wish you all a great night. And contact me or Klaus if there's anything we can do to help you in your efforts to get more farmers and food companies moving in our direction. So thank you very much, and good night.
All right, thank you. Bye-bye.